You will notice I am wearing my Autism Catalonia t-shirt today. I was invited to go to Girona in northern Spain to do a conference. And they gave me a lovely t-shirt, and strangely enough, I don't tend to wear it out much. Does anybody else wear autism t-shirts around in public? So this was the perfect occasion to wear it, because I never wear it anywhere else apart from in the garden. And my partner Keith has one as well, and so we might just be twins and wear them together in the garden. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today... Oh, there's a new lady. Hello.
I'm sorry.
Yes, all right, don't worry. I'm sorry you got lost. Right, we shall find you a chair. Hold on a second. Okay, with the lady at the back there's just giving you one. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, some of you might be kind of aware that traditionally people have always presumed that autism was very much a male thing, and that more recently people have talked about this idea of a female presentation of autism, which has led to many more autistic females being diagnosed. Traditionally, people thought there were, in the bit of autism that you inhabit, i.e. that you don't have an intellectual learning disability, people thought there were 9 times as many men as there were women with Asperger's syndrome, this bit of autism. More recently, we're down to about 2 to 1 male to female. So the ratio has just changed enormously because people have started to realise that not everybody presents and experiences their autism in this very traditional way. The reason that all of this happened is that because the kind of modern day pioneers of autism were 2 people. One was called Asperger and one was called Kanner. They were both talking about autism in the 1940s. They both studied boys only. They both thought autism was very rare, and from their initial work we have developed absolutely everything that we know about autism. So when I did all of my training in autism, even 10, 12, 15 years ago, it was all about boys and it was all about males. If you begin by finding boys, you will continue to find boys because the list of criteria that you're looking for is male, and surprise, surprise, it picks up more males than it does females. And that's been going on since the 1940s. So for sort of 60, 70 years or so, we've just perpetuated this whole thing. So because if you keep finding boys and then you try and do some research and you look for girls, there aren't any because you never found any. And so the research is covered in boys again. And so the next time you do some research, you can't find any girls. And then on we go going, there are no girls. Oh no, there are no girls. Look, there are no girls. And we end up kind of perpetuating that. So over the last sort of 10 years or so, people have started to realise that actually there are many girls, maybe as many females as there are males on the autistic spectrum, but that some of those individuals present their autism in a slightly different way, still meet all the criteria exactly, but present it in a way that people didn't realise. So we always used to think it was all Rainman, Sheldon, nerds, loners, people didn't want any friends, no imagination, no creativity. That's what autism looked like. There were people who sat in corners, who were quite superior, who were quite arrogant, who were quite withdrawn, quite a negative view of autism. Now we've recognised this idea, which people are talking about as a female profile of autism, but actually that's slightly incorrect because autism, the way that people exhibit their autism is not gender specific entirely. There will be males who present their autism in slightly different ways, and there will be females who are much more similar to our Rainman, Sheldon traditional kind of profile. So what I wanted to talk about was all of the possible ways that you can meet the criteria for autism, regardless of gender. So I don't want to talk about male autism or female autism. I'm going to talk about 0 autism and 1 autism, as in a nice binary kind of process. So in order to get your diagnosis of autism, because I'm sure there might be some of you who sit there and think, well, I can't be autistic because I don't do that, or I can't be autistic because I do that. And how does that fit? Because we're all taught such a stereotypical view of what autism is. And if you don't meet it, or people in your lives don't meet it, you just go, well, that's not right, I can't have this. I'm sure, has anybody here shared or disclosed their autism and immediately been met with, don't be so silly, you can't be autistic, you don't look autistic? Yeah, quite a few people. And that's about other people assuming that, Rainman, that you're Sheldon, that you can't be autistic. What kind of things do people say? You can't be autistic because what? What do they say? Has anyone said anything like that?
Well, it's happened with me with a couple of quite close friends.
Yeah.
And I think partly they're frightened to accept that I might be different.
Right.
And they won't let me change.
Right.
And because I'm so good at pretending.
Yes.
That I do present like a normal person.
Yes.
So it's a vicious circle.
Yes.
Neurotypical.
You are a normal person.
Well, I am a normal person.
Yes. Yes. A standard general population person. Yeah. So you think that they're saying you can't be autistic because it just challenges their belief?
Yeah, and they will.
That who they see is someone else inside? That you're putting on I don't know.
They don't even think that.
They don't even go that far. It just challenges them.
We put them out. They think to be normal.
What have people said to you?
When I was first diagnosed, it was actually my mother that said, she said, now you know what's wrong with you, do you think you'll find it easier to fit in with everybody?
Right, okay. Did everyone hear that? Now you know what's wrong with you, do you think you'll find it easier to fit in with everybody? No.
I said, why should I?
Yeah. Anybody else had that challenge? You can't be autistic? Yeah. What have you?
Go first.
I was just going to say I have.
Yeah.
But it was with friends who'd known me not all my life,
Yeah.
but decades, who just said, "No, you're just you." And it's like, well, that is true, but that doesn't negate the fact that I have autism.
Yes.
They don't appreciate the difficulties that I have, but I can point out that, how you used to invite me to things? You stopped doing that a long time ago because I kept saying no.
Yeah.
So that's how it sort of evolved.
Yeah, and I think people don't make those connections about all of that kind of stuff. And I think there's also a lot of people don't want a label, and they don't want to give you a label, even though I think a lot of us, we're really happy with the label, and the label has been a real explanation and a real but people are going, we don't need to label you, and I think some of us are going, no, please do label me. I'd like you to know that this defines me in some way. What about you, sir? What was your experience?
I'm being challenged everywhere I go because they can't see it.
Right. Yeah.
Some sort of fake.
Right.
Mental health services, NHS, everywhere.
Right. Okay. So quite a serious professional challenge, not even just people being well-meaning and.
You're having to fight your own corner. They're quite aggressive with it as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
My mum said, well, there was always something wrong with you.
Right.
So I backed off and thinking, actually, there was always something wrong with you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of shared experiences of this wrong with or explanation or all of that kind of thing. Yeah.
Can I just say, I've only recently been diagnosed, was wary of disclosure, but did it through work.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate, unbeknown to me, that both my line managers had experience.
Right.
And I got a much different response than I expected. So I was expecting a bit of an awkward conversation.
Yeah.
But actually, because one line manager, her brother, had Asperger's.
Right.
And the other one, her child has just been diagnosed.
So had they suspected you already?
Well, one of them did say that doesn't surprise me. But it was a positive experience for me.
Yeah.
I have experienced the other side of it.
Yeah, I think often it's the social side where you meet people for the first time, or people that you've known for a long time that just really struggle, as you said, to sort of feel that they have to shift their perception of you in some way. There's a speaker on the sort of autism circuit called Ros Blackburn, and she's very, very bright, intelligent woman, but she needs 24-hour care. If she stood up here, she would just look like me, perfectly able, perfectly capable, or very, very articulate. She needs a carer. She can't travel anywhere by herself, and she says, my greatest disability is my ability. Being articulate, being verbal just seems to fool people enormously that there may be some other stuff kind of going on. So in order to get this diagnosis, you have to have all three of these characteristics, criteria that you were all measured on when you had your diagnoses, and it's a package. So you have to meet all of them: the social and communication, the flexibility, logic, cognitive differences, and a sensory profile. You cannot be a little bit autistic. But lots of people think you can, don't they? Oh, well, I'm a little bit autistic too. Which bit of you is autistic? Is it your leg? Is it your what? Which bit of you? You may completely disagree with the model of diagnosis, because in reality, there isn't a definitive line that says these people over here are not autistic and these people over here are. But in clinical terms, there is. In order to diagnose people, you have to decide where's the cutoff. You have to decide that there is a cutoff somewhere. And in reality, that's probably nonsense. But that's the way we kind of need to look at it. And actually, the experience of autism is experiencing all of these things all together, all at once. So going to a shopping centre, it's really noisy, things keep changing, people are bumping into you, people are trying to communicate with you. That's all three of those happening at once. That's the autistic experience, is where am I, what am I doing, I can't cope, what's going on, I can't process all of this sensory stuff, the changes, the communication, all at once. If you're a little bit autistic and you only have one of those, that's nowhere near the same experience. So it isn't diagnosable to be a little bit autistic. Yeah, you had something to say?
That's exactly what I was looking up. So that's one of the experience that I get.
Yes.
From a lot of people that I'm a little bit, and I'm this, and we've all got traits, we've all got it. And there's a screenshot, it was something that was published about not being able to be a little bit autistic,
yeah.
How demeaning it is. That,
yes, but it's very well-meaning. People want to try and identify, but on the whole, I think they can't.
Without reading it all, the summary they give, or the expert, it's like being pregnant. You either are or you are.
That's a good analogy.
Sometimes we have pregnancy traits like lower back pain, tiredness, or swollen feet, but it doesn't mean we're pregnant.
That's brilliant. That's a really good analogy, actually, isn't it?
It's a continuum, and you can have, I've not got particularly sensory problems,
yeah.
but other problems.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a vast continuum.
Yeah, it is in reality, but there's a...
She just doesn't like going out. She's extreme social anxiety.
Yes.
She's highly intelligent.
Yes, yes. And for some people, some of that can look a bit like autism, that you might avoid being around people, that you like all the tins lined up in your cupboard, but actually that's not necessarily the case. What you're measured on is this whole kind of package of things. And what is definitely the case, I haven't got my flip chart. Is anybody familiar with the concept of, in fact, I'm going to write on a bit of paper, I can't be bothered to get that out. It's too big. Has anybody heard of the concept of a bell curve in statistics? Yeah, who wants to explain it to me? Yes?
It's a standard distribution of results that details a certain proportion is too extreme.
Yes, absolutely. So basically, in very simple measures, it means that in pretty much every question that you ask a group of people, 96% of those people will sit within the middle. How many children do you have? How big your feet are? What colour your eyes are? How many O-levels you've got? I've just exposed myself as being really old there. Most people will sit in the middle. And largely, we can think about that in the general population in terms of autism as well. What we have on either side are what we might call the outliers, the extremes. And those are people who do things either more or less than most people do. So these are the people with size 22 feet, and these are the people with size 1 feet when they're an adult. These are the people with 30 children, and these are the people with less than 0 children, because that probably doesn't work in the way of children, does it? But you see the kind of concept. So what we have in autism is something very similar. So if you think about almost all of the characteristics of autism, you will find that the general population fit within here. Think about eye contact, think about noise tolerance, you think about the number of friends that you have, you think about the amount of interactions that you enjoy. The majority of the population sit within this middle. And what we find in autism is often people who sit on either end. So, for example, in something like eye contact, which is one measure that that is measured upon, it's not specific. It's lumped in with a category that says non-verbal gestures to regulate social interaction. So nobody ever said, if you make eye contact, you're not autistic. That doesn't exist. And nobody ever said, in order to be autistic, you cannot make any eye contact. None of that happened. It's all lumped into a general non-verbally thing. But often, in reality, what we find in people with autism is either that person makes more eye contact than the typical person because perhaps it's not intuitive for them, they don't really know what they should be doing, so they end up being a bit intense, maybe staring a little bit longer, maybe having to think about how long they're making eye contact and then look away and then think about and then look back. And it becomes a little bit odd and a little bit awkward because you're having to think about, oh my God, have I looked at this person for too long? Now I look weird. What shall I do now? Some of you clearly identify with this inner commentary of, oh, now what do I do? How can I get out of it? What we end up at the other one is somebody who makes much less eye contact than other people do. So therefore, that's often someone who looks at the floor, who finds it easier to listen if they're not focusing on someone's face. Because if they're not reading that face very well, then actually looking at the face is really exhausting and really tiring. And then you're analysing the face and going, oh, their eyebrow just moved. What does that mean? Does it mean they hate me? Does it mean they want to sleep with me? I don't know what that means. Oh my God, I'm just going to look over here because that's just way too overwhelming. So typical people are supposedly in here with eye contact. It's intuitive, it's relatively natural. They just kind of know within their cultural setting when to look and when to look away. What we have with autistic people is that it's not necessarily always intuitive, and so we might find people behaving in ways that are considered unusual and extreme, either too much or too little in comparison to the general population. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today in lots of the bits of autism, is how does this person manifest their autism in a way that, according to the diagnostic models, is not typical. So we know that the problem with diagnostic models and psychiatry and psychology is that it assumes that a minority group is dysfunctional and it measures you against the norm. We know that's not true, but that's the game we're playing, is that this is the norm, this is the majority of people, and here we have people on either end. So we're going to talk about some of those bits. So in terms of communication, and what you might find as individuals as you sit there is you think, well, I identify with a little bit of our 0 profile and a little bit of our 1 profile, and it's all a bit mixed up. And that's perfectly reasonable. There's no definitive yes, you're here or no, you're not here. So what I've called our 0 profile is often the more traditional profile of autism. And what we might see there is somebody who has no speech at all. Maybe their speech is late or delayed. They may have very little desire to talk to anybody. So they're seen as quite silent children and remain so into adulthood. Somebody who isn't even aware that people have a huge variety of facial expressions. I think it's about 1,300 facial expressions. Anybody know anything about that? That's a real shock to most of you who thought there were 2. And diagnostically, when you ask people questions like, can you read people's faces? And they go, yes, I can. And then you realise that the only faces that person can read is when somebody is screaming or frowning or crying or smiling, and that all of the much more subtle ones in the middle are completely missed. So some of these questions, it's a kind of, how do you know what you don't know? How do I know what other people are doing? How do I know how many facial expressions there are? They're difficult questions to answer. What I always think is, if you are frequently confused or surprised by the way somebody reacts, the likelihood is that you may not be picking up on a lot of non-verbal signals. Because if you were picking up on those signals, then their behaviour and their mood would kind of follow through, and that wouldn't be terribly surprising. Hello. We'll just find you a couple of chairs. So typically this might be a person that if you ask them a question, they really don't give very much information, that they answer just the question that they've been asked in a very direct, a very literal way, with a one-word answer that just provides enough information to get you to move on. It might be somebody who generally kind of avoids being very close to people, certainly not a tactile person, somebody that wants to kind of keep well out of the way. This is our traditional understanding of autism. On the other side are number ones, who are more like this new understanding of autism, is that often this might be somebody who had very, very early speech. Their speech is very advanced, they have an enormous vocabulary. My mother always said that I could speak full sentences by the age of 9 months old, which is just weird. My son's first word, he was massively into robot words. His first word was tractor, and very quickly afterwards came annihilation. So vocabulary, really interested in the words, really wanting to speak. This might be somebody who's quite intense in terms of their communication with you. They appear to be quite proactive, quite social. They're looking at you, they're staring at you, they're really kind of grilling into you. It may well be somebody who, rather than being almost oblivious to this idea of non-verbal signals, that it becomes somebody who becomes hyper-vigilant to non-verbal signals and not necessarily accurately. So somebody who is watching, they moved, they changed, they shifted, something happened, what does it mean? I've offended them, what does it mean? Become very anxious about reading all of these kinds of signals, but as I said, are not necessarily particularly accurate at doing so. There is a tendency for a lot of autistic people, if someone is not smiling, i.e. their face is fairly neutral, as most of yours are, to assume that that means that person is in a bad mood. That is incorrect. So very frequently autistic people are saying, oh, they didn't like me, I don't know what was wrong, what's wrong, what have I done, what's wrong? And the person's going, nothing, I'm fine, I'm just doing the ironing, I was just watching the telly, I'm fine. That if the facial expression is not obviously positive, an autistic person, if you're not brilliant at reading the facial expressions and you're hypervigilant to them, will spot every single tiny change, even though it might be completely meaningless to that person's mood. Does anybody recognise that kind of desire to, that belief, like, I've offended them, they don't like me, this is what's happened, and actually you're wrong. Yeah, a lot of the time, not wrong. Also, rather than being this very silent, quiet person, it might be someone who just never shuts up, who is just monologuing all the time, talking at you all the time, usually about themselves, usually about their favourite topic. Some recognition in the room of such things. Often giving huge amounts of detail, because in the black and white world of autism, you either give no information or you give every single tiny piece of information available on the topic, because you don't know what the other person knows already, you don't know what they need to know, you don't know what to leave out. So as you can see, these two people look quite different. One of them is silent, one of them is looking at the floor, one of them is not engaging, not smiling, maybe not making their own facial expressions, quite a flat, blank facial expression, which again is quite common for some people. The other person is talking, they're in your face, they're articulate, they've got this huge vocabulary, they're at you all of the time. Both of these people tick the autism box. Both of them are outliers. They're on either ends of that kind of idea. Yeah, does that make sense? So does anybody feel definitively a zero? Who thinks, yep, that's me, I'm very much a zero, I'm an avoider of people, I don't look at people, yep. And what about the number ones? Something more on that side a little bit. Yeah. A few years ago, you would never have been diagnosed as autistic if you came up with this more one type profile. And obviously you can be a mixture of the two. You wouldn't have had a diagnosis because nobody thought that autism could look like that you could be proactive, that you could be kind of social in any kind of a way.
Can you be a bit of both?
Yes. And I think you can be a bit of both. And I had a bit of a discussion with somebody about this. He may have been a professor in Oxford, about the idea of introversion and extroversion in autism. Have we talked about this before? Have I mentioned this before? Not sure. Who feels they're an introvert? Yeah, and some people feel they're an extrovert? Yeah. My argument was, Because one of the things about being autistic is that you'll argue with everybody, whether they're a professor in Oxford or not, and whether you have any qualifications to do so or not. You'll just tell them that they're wrong. Anyone identify with that? Oh, yay, authority. They're just wrong. I think the concept of introversion and extroversion are not autistic concepts. I think they're neurotypical concepts. And I think it's the belief that each person has a kind of static state, a personality state, whereas I'm not sure that they do. And I think specifically for autistic people, I know from my experience, if I'm comfortable, if I've got something to say, if I'm excited, if it's something I'm really sure about, then I'm absolutely come across as an extrovert, very much so, very confident, very able, I'm at it. In a different setting where I don't know how to be, I don't know what to do, I have nothing to contribute, I don't understand the point of being there, somebody else might meet me and they would absolutely consider me to be a complete and utter introvert. So I wonder sometimes if for autistic people we do what needs to be done given the setting and situation. Does anybody else kind of feel like that?
I think it was Dream that actually said something very similar.
Yeah.
He brought out this flip chart, not a flip chart, a colour sample chart. And said, well, I'm a particular colour ink, and I will look differently depending on what paper what colour paper.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, where's that? Is that in your book? No. Was that something you talked about here?
No, it was something that we were given as printers, and I think I'd brought it in to show it. That
right.
There was 3 colours, the primary colours,
Yep.
green and blue, but printed on about 10 different sorts of
Yeah,
paper.
yeah.
And the idea was to show customers and say, how many different colours are there? There's only 3,
Yeah.
but it appears to be far
Nice.
more.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're much more kind of adaptable in some respects. If it's a good environment, then yes, maybe not read the signals and won't shut up. If it's not a good environment, then there's nothing happening at all. So the idea of being definitively introverted or extroverted, I'm not sure it always applies to all of us.
I feel more comfortable in smallish groups, but not
Yeah,
large groups.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, it's about if different people met you and said, oh, this is how this person was, it could be incredibly different perceptions of you, I think, on the first time. So social interaction, again, our traditional 0 profile is they're loners, they don't want friends, completely oblivious to their own social behaviour, other people's social behaviour. This person doesn't make any adjustments, they say no to all invitations, they don't want to go out, they don't want to join in, they don't want any person in their life. That's what we understood autism to be like. And I know we've talked about relationships and things here, and I think I did a bit of a show of hands, and it was very much the case. I think that the majority of people in this group did want at least one person in their life. It may be intermittent, it may be not very, not many people or not very frequently, but most of us, I think, don't want to be completely and utterly alone. Do you think that's true? To some degree. Yeah, you agree with that, Andy?
I have a good example of that. Maybe once a year I get the opportunity to go for a weekend break away.
Yeah.
I've been for the last 3 years and I can't socialise out in public.
Yeah.
I can't speak.
Yeah.
In that sort of environment. But they keep on putting me in a single room. But it's the only opportunity I ever get to speak one-to-one. And I've only just discovered that that's a deliberate thing because they've assumed that I want to be on my own.
Yeah. So you need to speak out and say that that's not the case. Yeah. So maybe they think they're doing you a favour by putting you by yourself and... Yeah, absolutely. So the reality is for a lot of people, autistic people, is that there is a real desire to fit in somewhere, even if it's just with one person or just a small people, just once a year, once every 6 months. Again, it might be somebody who's really hypervigilant to their own behaviour. They're fitting in. Linda and I met a little girl who was 5 yesterday, and she says to her parents at school, at 5, I can't be me. I have to be like everyone else. I have to copy people so that they don't say that I'm weird and babyish. And she has that awareness at 5 that she can't be herself. And I think a lot of us know the mental strain of being someone you're not, bending all of the time, trying not to get it wrong. And there's this huge fear of social failure in this group over here. Rather than not caring, being arrogant, superior, which is what people always talked about autistic people being like, actually there's a whole bunch of autistic people who care very much about what people think about them and who are absolutely devastated to the point of self-harm, to the point of suicidal thoughts, to the point of mental illness about this social failure and this desire to kind of fit in. So again, you wouldn't have been diagnosed with autism a few years ago. What you would have been diagnosed with was some kind of mental illness. You'd have been diagnosed with bipolar, you'd been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, because that desperateness to fit in, it looks like it's kind of psychiatric illness rather than just autism. So all of this is kind of new. But if you wanted friends, that was a big in the autism box up until very, very recently, and still very much the case for some people. The problem, there's a bit of a paradox and a contradiction in here, and this comes up quite a lot with a lot of people that I meet, is I want to be liked, but the only people out there for me to be liked by are people that I don't really like, because mostly they're people who I don't really identify with, that they're much more social than I am. Does that make sense to anyone? So you're kind of, I want you to like me, but I don't really care whether you like me, but I do, because there's no one else to like me. So there's a bit of a kind of weird contradiction. I want to have friends, but not you. But you're all there is, because I'm in a minority and everybody else is different. And I hear this so many times where there is just this kind of weird, I want to be me, but if I'm me, then nobody likes me, but I don't like you anyway. So should I just be me? No, because I want you to like me. Oh God, and it's a big old kind of mess. The solution is to find people that are like you, that allow you to be yourself, the people that are similar, people that kind of get you in some way, I think. But in the general world out there, when you are a minority, it's really hard to get that balance of, can I be myself and still be accepted in the world? And the answer for a lot of people is no. And it's trying to find the point where you're not bending yourself to be someone you're not so far that it makes you unwell, but you're not being yourself so much that actually you just annoy people all of the time and get sacked. So there's a middle ground somewhere in there. I'm not entirely sure where it is, but I think that's the issue somewhere. So in terms of relationships, again, traditionally we always thought that autistic people did not want a relationship. They absolutely didn't want a partner. They weren't interested in any of those kinds of things. That their experience would be that because we thought they were mainly males, and traditionally it was males that were having to make the initiation into starting relationships, that this would be somebody who would be very late in coming to kind of intimacy and physical relationships. They'd have very, very few partners. They wouldn't be approaching somebody. If you can't read people's signals, it's hard to flirt. It's hard to know if someone likes you. It's hard to put yourself in the same environment to chat someone up or any of those kinds of things. We understood that autistic people don't do empathy. So how do you relate to somebody's emotional needs if you just can't understand them at all? That is the profile that we understood. We now understand that actually there are a whole bunch of people who very, very much want a relationship and a partner for multiple reasons. Quite a lot of people have a partner who is, in the nicest possible way, some kind of emotional stability, sometimes a carer to some degree, somebody who sorts stuff out, that you're quite often quite codependent. I know myself and my partner are. We really are in a bubble, kind of on our own. I help him, he helps me. We go out into the world together like a little team. We come back, we do a high five and go, phew, nobody knew we were weird, hooray, another day success. And there's a real kind of, a familiarity and a comfort in all of that. There are people that have, rather than having very late first encounters, there are people that have very early first encounters, and often that's because they're very vulnerable. If you can't read people, if people say they want to be with you, if people say they love you, if people say that they're going to be your friend, then there's a real naivety and a gullibility in autistic people, and we just believe people. We're literal, we take people at face value, we don't see hidden agendas. It's all in the diagnostic criteria, and that means that a lot of us have had lots of quite predatory, quite dangerous, quite abusive encounters because we didn't see it coming. And it's nothing to do with intelligence. It's nothing to do with being clever or able. It's a completely, being able to read people and their agendas is a completely different part of the brain, a completely different skill. So again, we end up with a profile of people who may well have had lots of relationships, who may be seeking relationships, who may be putting themselves in these dangerous situations. And traditionally, we never thought that looked like autism, but it does. Because you can't read people, because you get it wrong, because you make poor decisions about partners and relationships, because you struggle to see that other person's perspective. It's not the case that autistic people don't have empathy. It is the case that autistic people don't have neurotypical empathy. And neurotypical people, they don't have autistic empathy, they just have neurotypical empathy. There is a huge amount of empathy within autistic people, and I've seen that in this room so many times. If somebody shares something that the rest of you just go, oh God, yes. Even if you've not had that absolute experience, you get it, don't you? You know what it's like to feel awkward, you know what it's like to feel overwhelmed, you know what it's like to feel uncomfortable in a way that neurotypical people won't. They know what it's like between themselves, but this is a different experience, isn't it? It's a different experience that you have. So the empathy is there within your own culture, within your own social group, within your own network. I think the issue is cross, and this is something that Luke Bearden, who comes here sometimes, talks about, that cross phenotype empathy doesn't exist. It's the same way that we can't empathise with gay people if we're straight. We can't empathise with black people if we're white. We can't empathise with people with very deep religious beliefs if we don't have any. We just can't, because we can't put ourselves in that person's place. So you look too social, you look too that you want to be around people. It doesn't look like autism, but it is. So you can have all of these stuff on the other side, on the right-hand side, and still be autistic. The issue is that often these things go wrong because you can't read people, you can't work these kind of bits and pieces out. So functional abstract imagination, functional being the important word. So abstract imagination is the idea of being flexible, is the idea of planning, predicting what will happen in the world, working out the possible outcomes, consequences, assessing risk, all of those kind of things. So over on Zero Land, our traditional autistic person was doing no imaginary play whatsoever. They never talked to their toys. They just lined everything up. They organised everything in straight lines. They struggled to make any kind of decisions whatsoever because that involves choosing between different options. They never had an idea. They never generated anything. They never established anything. So tended to have this very, very structured, very rigid, very scheduled life. More variables, more stress. No variables, no stress. So it's a very practical kind of way to live your life. Not wanting change, not wanting new things, just leave everything the same because that's the best thing to do. Anyone suggests anything new to you, just say no to it, because then you maintain your kind of safe world. And I think most of us have an element of that. Most people kind of they're absolutely, and this is about your brain just not being able to run quickly enough with a very fast and ever-changing world. So that's what autism very much looked like traditionally. What we now understand is that there are some people who become completely and utterly immersed in their fantasy worlds. They develop hundreds of characters, and those characters are their friends. Those characters have names, they have personalities, they have birthdays, they have whole backstories. Sometimes their toys have whole backstories and names and birthdays. They are another world that is a safer world than the world of people. but it's absolutely a fantasy world, and they know it is. This is not psychosis, it's not delusion. They know that it's not real, but it's just a better one to go to, because when you go and hang out with those other people, oh God, I'm going to get it wrong again, and they're going to think I'm weird or rude. Actually, I'm just going to stay home and play with my toys, or play with the people in my head. And this goes for adults too. I certainly meet a number of adults who have these deep, vivid fantasy worlds and love it. They disappear off on great adventures, and it's wonderful. It's a hugely creative space.
Sometimes that can be a plus because
Yeah, absolutely. So there are loads of autistic authors, painters, photographers, poets, creative people, which we never believed were possible. We thought that autistic people couldn't be creative at all, and that's not true. The downside of this non-functional, if you like, imagination is that rather than imagining nothing, you can imagine anything. And so everything becomes possible, and therefore everything becomes possibly frightening, worrying. Maybe you're not great at assessing the risk of certain things. Maybe you think it's equally likely that you're going to be knocked down by a car than there is a zombie hiding under your bed. Genuinely, if you can't assess risk and likelihood, which some autistic people can't, you may spend your whole life looking under your bed for zombies rather than worrying about not stepping out of cars. I am that person. I've not yet found one, but the fact that I've not yet found one does not yet mean that there isn't one still going to be there. It looks like mental illness, but actually in context it's not. It's just, well, anything could happen. Anything could happen. Prove it to me. Prove it to me. You can't prove it to me, therefore it's something that I need to worry about. Non-autistic people are very good at working out what they need to give their attention to and what they need to worry about. Autistic people give their attention far too much sometimes in one area, and then forget about all the other things that you might need to kind of worry about because you didn't even know they were there. They're a kind of mystery or something. You recognise that sort of this? And the hyperfocus can be brilliant, but sometimes it can be a bit of a nuisance when you get stuck. You really need to go shopping, but I'm still looking at foreign houses in France, and I will find the one that I need to buy. That you cannot get off that because you're so kind of deeply into that. So what this person ends up with, multiple activities, multiple special interests, moving on, new things all of the time, house full of wool, house full of jewellery, house full of photography equipment, house full of cycling bikes, because you've just moved on really quickly.
Isn't there a thing linked here with ADHD?
I think potentially, the ADHD bit is often you never finish anything. So the ADHD, and I mean, certainly you can have both. Of course you can have both. I'm sure some people in the room have both diagnoses. In a way, I think sometimes autism and ADHD together are a bit dangerous, because if you just had ADHD, you'd get bored so quickly, you probably wouldn't have got round to doing anything. But if you've got autism, you've focused enough to dangerously do something, and then the ADHD, you do them. Whereas the ADHD people have kind of got bored before anything really serious happens. The autistic ADHD people, they're moving house all the time, or making huge decisions sometimes. But yeah, it's an interesting combination sometimes. So there's imagination, lots of activities, multiple failures, but seeing that everything is possible. Rather than seeing that nothing is possible, this person often sees that everything is possible. And again, this is why the girls got missed. This is what the girls traditionally were like. Lots of imagination, lots of creative worlds, and saying yes to things. Saying, yes, I can do that, but actually not assessing it well. Loads of relationships, loads of jobs, loads of crafts, loads of activities. And because you've not assessed it very well, they go wrong. But it doesn't look like autism. But it is autism in some people. So it's not about saying no to everything. Sometimes it's about saying yes to everything, and then later realising on that it's a really terrible idea. Into our special interests. Again, traditionally, everybody thought that everybody liked space, Thomas the Tank Engine, dinosaurs, science, technical things. It was all about objects rather than people. That's what people used to say. I used to say, If an autistic child walks into a room, they will not give you any more attention than they will give a chair, because the chair is of equal interest to a person. Yeah, do you remember stuff like that? And that may well be true. That for some people the chair is more interesting than a person, because it's a chair and it's great and it looks interesting and whatever. We had this again, this sense that people were very tidy, that they were very organised, that everything was very, very, as we said, avoiding change at all costs. You look after yourself first. And some people very much do live that life. What we now understand is that for some people, their interests are not objects, they're not facts, and they're not technical. Their interests are people. There are a phenomenal amount of autistic psychologists, psychology student, people who love self-help books, people who love body language books, people who love anything and everything to do with you as a person. How do I make myself better? But also, what the hell is everyone else doing? I need a book in order to understand what on earth they're doing. So loads of people are learning to try and fit in as though you can learn from a manual, that this person is crossing their arms. Hang on, what do I need? Okay, that's what that means. Oh, it's too late, they've hit me. Not intuitive, not fast enough. A lot of people, one of Linda's favourite questions in diagnosis is, do you prefer animals to people? If you answer yes to that question, we're done. Yeah. That's not true, I'm being flippant. But on the whole, it tends to generally be autistic people that will say that they prefer animals to people. And when you say, well, why is that? They say, well, they don't talk. That's the first answer. They're not complicated. They're easy to connect with. You can read them. You understand what their needs are. Their needs are easily met. They don't have hidden agendas. They don't lie. So when people love animals often because they're autistic, because people are just too complicated to have a satisfactory relationship with. Craft, making stuff, understanding the world, so understanding politics, understanding sociology. Some people are just really, they just want to know how it all fits together in order to be able to feel more comfortable within it, whatever that might be. It might be history. History is a really big thing. History is about people. What did they do in the past? How did they live? Look at the buildings, all of that kind of stuff. We also know that some people, rather than being very organised, and I think people always expected autistic people to be really organised, that some people hugely struggle to pull all of that together and live in absolute chaos, both physically, mentally, financially. Who is massively messy and out of control in here? Yep, a few of you. Who is obsessively tidy and throws everything out? Yep, a few there as well. So again, we never thought that autistic people would be disorganised. We thought they must have a routine, they must do it. But for some people, the ability to put that routine together and stick to it, it's just not possible. They just cannot. There's too many bits, there's too many pieces for them to pull it all together and do that. So what we end up with for some people is hoarding. Some people cannot throw things away. Everything becomes meaningful. They become very emotionally attached to objects which have history, which have emotional memories to them. Or they feel, well, I might need that. And if I might need it, I need to keep it, even if it's a paperclip or a bit of sellotape or a newspaper from 35 years ago. Some people genuinely are concerned, but what if I don't have it? Even though they've never looked at the newspaper, even though they'll never have it, bother with it again, there is that fear of uncertainty and change and unpredictability. And certainly for some people that becomes really problematic, enormously so. So change is on your own terms. I think autistic people, we do like change, but it's our change. It's self-generated change. Because at the point that you make a decision about something new, you've already processed it, and in which case it's fine. The problem is change imposed by other people when you haven't had the opportunity to process it, and then it's just like, whoa, it's either terrifying or massively exciting. And so you end up saying yes or no, depending on your general kind of profile. Whereas your own change is fine because, yeah, I'm good with that. I've done my spreadsheet, I've done my research, I'm completely on it. I can move forward very easily. So the idea that autistic people don't like change is not true. What we don't like is change imposed upon us without sufficient detail to make sense of it, to be able to make an easy transition. And again, in life generally, we end up with these very different profiles of people around work, around studies and that kind of thing. We either end up with people who have one job in their whole life, or we end up with people who have 40 in their whole life, because your general kind of profile is quite different. So the traditional profile suggests, I've got a job, why would I want another one? I can't imagine a career. I can't imagine what it feels like to be somewhere else. Why would I be somewhere else if I'm perfectly fine here? There is no reason to do so. The idea of a career is just way too abstract to think about climbing and moving and changing through your life. If you like doing something, why would you ever get bored of it? You just don't get bored of it. You don't see the point in development whatsoever. I'll just stay here. And I've certainly worked in some environments, particularly in the Ministry of Defence, where I was working for a number of years. And they must be one of the longest serving workforces I've ever come across. They have 3,000 employees, and a huge number of them have been there for 30 plus years, sometimes doing the same job on the same grade. And because they're all science and technical jobs, a very large proportion of them are on the autistic spectrum. They don't want to move. Nobody's interested in moving. I'm happy, I've got a job, I love it, that's it, job done. On the other side, we end up with this person with the imagination who says, oh, I could do that. I could do that. And then off they go and apply for this job, and then they get the job and they go, oh, I didn't know it would be like this. I'll have to leave. And off they go. Again. That's my profile. I've had getting around 40 jobs, I think. So if you make poor decisions, you are forced to move out of them and then get another one. So it's all about that decision-making thing. It's not that you want more jobs, you're desperately looking for a job that you would like, but you're just not very good at contextualizing the potential of what those things might be like. And then that person has a really bad CV, and often is quite stressed, quite mentally unwell, because they're failing all the time, and because they're putting themselves in situations which aren't terribly helpful. Often way too social. I think often people underestimate the amount of social interaction that there's going to be. So, last one, just before we stop for some break, is the sensory stuff. Again, we see that autistic people, nobody really knows why, tend to sit in some ways, not all the time, but in some senses on one or other end. So what this means is that you may be somebody who very much avoids certain places that the majority of the population find very easy. That might be supermarkets, it might be restaurants, it might be shopping centres, it might be lush, smelly shops, it might be all of, gyms. We talked about running clubs and stuff the other month. Or it might be people who just love it. It might be people who see something and they have to touch it because it's so beautiful. They surround themselves with fluffy things and they sniff everything. We had a young woman in the clinic the other day who, she was a sniffer, and she picked up one of these and she was sniffing it, and then I had a sniff as well, and we tried to work out what it smelt of. And the one she had smelt of barbecue. This one doesn't. But it was a whole different world where you just naturally, she sniffed the water in the jug. That was her first point of contact. Rather than looking at it, rather than touching it, it was to smell it. And that's what we see in autism, is that sometimes people have a much stronger draw towards knowing how something sounds, taste, licking things, touching things, smelling things, being more attuned to these things, both in a negative way that overwhelms you, but also in a really positive way that is just magical and ecstatic and absolutely beautiful. So we might have people that hate fireworks, hate loud noises, notice really tiny noises, but love music. They might love being at a concert, because contextually, being at a concert, you expect the music to be loud, so that's fine. What you don't like is when an alarm goes off unexpectedly and you didn't know it was coming. So there's definitely something about kind of prediction in there as well. We might have people who love light. Some people stare at light bulbs. Some people like darkness. Some people can smell tiny things, but they love strong scented smells. And there are certainly people that food is a really big one. It's really, really common thing because it's something that all of us have to do every single day. There are people that can tell every single tiny ingredient in a dish that they've got, a curry or quite a spice meal. They can tell you absolutely every herb and every spice that's in it. They can tell you absolutely when their dolmio sauce ingredients have slightly changed from the manufacturer, or their washing powder, or whatever has changed. They know all of these things. There are then some people who just cannot bear any flavour whatsoever and end up just eating very, very bland foods because their taste buds are almost so sensitive they just can't tolerate anything at all. So a real kind of mixture, and again, we used to think that it was people that didn't like certain things, but actually now we understand that sometimes it's people who love particular things. So on that note, we shall stop and we shall eat cake and have a cup of tea. And then we shall come back and just wrap up with any thoughts, questions, anything about that, to finish at 2 o'clock. 20 minutes for break, so 25 to we shall return with any questions or thoughts that you had, and we'll talk about Ronnie's timing conundrum as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.